Tonight on Mob Talk, a profile of mobster turned government witness Tommy Scafid.
The former wise guy turned on mob boss Joey Merlino and his crew, then testified against them because he thought the mob wanted him dead. Here's more from Dave Stratweiser and the Inquirer's George Anastasia.
Welcome to this week's edition of Mob Talk. I'm Dave Stratweiser.
And I'm George Anastasia with the Philadelphia Inquirer.
George, this week we're going to talk about informant Tommy Scafid, known on the street as HoarseHead.
Yes, a fourth-generation wise guy who became a cooperating witness and who didn't want to be a witness. And his reluctance, I think, is one of the reasons he was effective.
All right, George, we're here in Gray's Ferry at the site of the old Warfield Diner, a historical FBI tape here, a mob hit caught on tape. Tommy Scafid was one of the guys carrying out the hit.
Yeah, it's the only time, I think, in history that a mob hit has been recorded while it's in progress. And Scafid testified he was one of 4 shooters who busted in here pre-dawn, March the 2nd, 1993, and opened fire on Joey Ciancaglini. Now, the other interesting thing about Tommy Scafid's story is another one of the shooters he alleged was Mikey Ciancaglini. So it was brother against brother, part of the deterioration of this Philadelphia crime family.
And the camera that the FBI had was right across the street in an upstairs window at a building, and they had a bug inside.
A bug inside, so we see it's shadowy because it's pre-dawn, it's dark, you can't recognize the shooters. But we hear the footfalls, the running in, you hear the waitress scream, you hear the gunfire, you see the shadows come running out again. It was a fantastic piece of tape. It was played again and again and again for the jury.
You've been covering a mob for a long time. Ever seen anything like that before?
Never have ever. You know, I don't think anyone in anywhere else in the country has a tape like that. It's unique to Philadelphia. It might be unique to the world. I don't know of any other mob hit in progress that's been recorded.
All right, now let's talk about Tommy Scafid. What kind of witness was he in your estimation?
Tommy Scafid was a very effective witness, although ironically, his testimony about this particular shooting didn't result in any kind of guilty findings because there was conflicting testimony from another witness. But in terms of talking about the inner workings of the organization, the extortions, the greed, the treachery, and talking about the individuals, you got to remember, Tommy Scafid grew up with Joey Merlino, Giorgi Borghese, the guys on that faction, and then he switched over to the Stanford organization, spent time in jail, was ready to come out, and believed he was going to be killed if he came out, and that's the reason he flipped. But he did his time as a wise guy. He did what he thought a wise guy was supposed to do.
And he played both sides of the fence. He was a money maker, had all the places, 300-400 names of people they got street tax from, kickbacks from, stuff like that. So both sides wanted him, right?
Yeah, I mean, when he switched over from the Merlino faction to the Stanford faction, that's what he brought with him. He brought income. He brought revenue. I mean, that's what he was. He was a street guy. He was a loan shark. He was a bookmaker. He knew how to make collections. And that's what he brought to the Stanford organization. And then he was convicted along with Stanford, and those guys went away. And as he's about to come back out, and Joey Merlino and those guys are in charge, and Ralph Natale, Tommy Scafid starts to hear he's got a problem. And that's what causes him to flip.
One of the things he talks about is a alleged hit on Geraldo Rivera. Geraldo comes to town, gets into a confrontation with John Stanford, and supposedly Stanford wants him hit.
It happens right out here. Stanford had the food distribution company right here on Warfield Street. And Geraldo came here to do a show and went knocking on the door, as only Geraldo can do. And it annoyed Stanford, and according to Tommy anyway, he wanted to whack him.
Yeah, he said next time he comes back into town, we're taking out him and his cameraman.
Yeah, exactly.
Geraldo didn't take too kindly to that either, by the way.
No, well, you know what? I mean, that was indicative more of Stanford than it was of anyone else. Stanford just didn't quite get the whole idea of the way the American media operates. Sicilian, if you're not with him, you're against him, everybody's an enemy. That's the way Stanford was. I mean, he wanted to pop me at one point, too, so that's just the way he was.
Yeah, let me talk about Scafid's demeanor on the witness stand. He actually teared up a couple times because it was clear he was upset that he had to testify against his boyhood friends.
Yeah, I mean, these are guys he grew up with and he was testifying against them. I think part of it was, and this came across, he really believed in this stuff. I mean, the mafia was over, it was done, but he still was a true believer. And he was going against that whole code that he had kind of grown up with. And I think he said he was a fourth-generation wise guy. Don't be surprised if we hear from him or see him again. If there's another racketeering case coming and the alleged boss Joe Legambi is part of it, Tommy Scafid can bring something to the table vis-a-vis Legambi.
You beat me to my next question. That was my next question. Do you think we see Scafid? And the reason we see him is he can help out a little bit on talking about when Joe Legambi was made by the mob.
He was physically there. He was not a made guy. I think he was outside the room with one of the young kind of JV wise guys who would serve as drivers and as lookouts when a making ceremony went down. He has said that he was there when Legambi got made. Legambi got made after the infamous murder of Frankie Flowers, the Alfonso. In addition to that, he can set Legambi within the organization, give some historic perspective, and if Borghese is part of the new indictment, which we suspect he will be, he also can bring a lot to the table about who Borghese was. So in terms of a new racketeering investigation and indictment, Tommy Scafid could provide historic backdrop, which is always valuable when you're trying to tell a story to the jury.
All right, George, that's the 3 top-performing mob informants as far as we're concerned. Next week, we go to the guys who didn't fare so well on the witness stand. We're going to start with mob boss turned informant Ralph Natale.
Yeah, Ralph Natale always talked a better game than he played, both out here on the streets and on the witness stand. He was up on the stand, I think, for 12 or 13 days in the Molina racketeering trial, and he got hammered. And I don't think he came across very effectively. I think he thought he was better than he actually was.
All right, we're going to get into that next week. That's this week's edition of Mob Talk. We'll see you next week.